それではお時間となりましたので。
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for us to start the plenary session on Rio+20 follow-up. Already our speakers are on the stage. The session will be moderated by Professor Yokishi Hirono, Professor Emeritus, Seikei University, and the floor is yours. Take it away, Professor Hirono.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't you respond to me? Good afternoon. For all of you who've gathered here, Rio+20 is all too familiar, I believe, to all of you here today, this afternoon. But for the general public in Japan, Rio+20 is not a particularly familiar term. This is what I felt prior to attending the Rio+20 conference and after attending the Rio+20 meeting. But right in front of you, we have a wonderful panel. And I cannot wait to hear from the speakers of Rio+20 and follow-up. Our first speaker is Mr. Professor Neytoon. He used to be with UNEP. After serving at UNEP, he's moved on to UNDP. He served the Director General of Asia at UNEP. Also, Mr. Ray Won used to be a public official in South Korea. He's moved on then to UNESGAP. I used to be the Director General in charge of development, but at UNESGAP, he was the Director in charge of development and environment. Mr. Shrestha currently serves as the coordinator of the SDG at the UN headquarters. At the Rio+20, he was one of the most active participants. He was instrumental. He used to be in charge of Asia Pacific at the Bangkok office of UNEP. I believe you all have my impression on Rio+20. That is a paper in your handout, I believe. That is in English. For English material, ISAP staff member has put together Rio+20 looked from the ISAP perspective in English. So those two papers should be used as a reference. For Japanese participants, I recommend that you use both my paper in Japanese and ISAP's English paper as reference. Now, we are to discuss Rio+20 and follow-up. I myself did attend Rio+20 from the beginning to the end, and my impression and observation are all described in my paper, but I would like to emphasize the following 3 points. First point, I would like to emphasize that as a participant who's participated in the process since the first meeting, the civil society was largely represented. There were a lot of people representing the civil society this time around because it's an intergovernmental meeting. Much importance was placed on intergovernmental negotiations. However, as a person who spent many years at the United Nations, civil society members maybe it's not productive for UN purposes. Therefore, I took part in many meetings with civil society organizations. And I know that there are a lot of activities that are taking place on the part of CSOs. As a result of their active initiatives, I believe there is a consensus emerging, and I believe we have been able to reach a certain level of agreement, but this was not necessarily reflected upon the negotiations between the governments. Secondly, as a result of attending Rio+20, I've got a strong impression that as we speak, in the developed world, poverty is increasing as a result of globalization. There is increasing disparity, exemplified by the example of Greece, for example. Unemployment rate amongst the youth is as high as 25% in the United States. Amongst developed countries, in Spain, 50% is the employment rate for the Spanish youth. In other parts of Europe, the youth unemployment rate is somewhere between 15 to 25%. So unemployment in the developed world has become a major problem. So poverty reduction, employment generation are not necessarily challenges limited to developing countries, but these are challenges that are faced by both developed and developing countries. And that, against this backdrop, we have this notion emerging, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. And SDG is not an aspiration for not only for developing countries, but for developed world as well. Third point, and this is a point I would like to give a particular emphasis on. In the past, in the civil society organizations, I have to say that when it comes to sustainable development debate, private sector companies have been quite hesitant. But larger companies, global companies that are the members of the Global Compact have become increasingly vocal on the issue of SDG. Therefore, it is a growing trend that private sector companies are increasingly actively engaged in debate, and they are making a significant contribution to in forming a consensus. So those are the three particular points I wanted to emphasize as an impression that I've gathered from I myself attending Rio+20, and I'm looking forward to hear from the observations of our speakers. So our first speaker is Professor Neytun. You have 25 minutes.
どうぞ。When our chairman, Professor Hirono, say 25, he means 25 minutes. So I have to be very, very conscious of this. And somebody's going to show some cards somewhere too when we are about 3 minutes away. So I want to see where that person is so that I can recognize right in there, so I can't miss you. Very good. Thank you. I'm very delighted and honored to be given this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Not so much what has happened in the last 20 years, not so much what has happened in the last 2 years leading up to Rio+20, but setting that as a stage to look forward of what we can be doing. I should also add, I was in a rush to send off my biodata, but I should have added one short little sentence there. I was very privileged to be very, very closely involved with the first Rio, the 1992. I was with the Secretariat for 2.5 years from the very beginning. Morris Strong and I, we flew the plane together from New York to Geneva, and the first 4 days we shared a little office together, and I was the director of program that coordinated the preparation and negotiations of Agenda 21. I've also been very fortunate to be invited by the Asian Development Bank to advise the ADB on the Rio+20 process. And they also invited me to join the team and to be at Rio+20. So I had the opportunity 20 years later to be also at Rio. But most of the time I was at Rio Central, but now and again I sneaked over to the other side of the street and see where all the excitement